Hi everyone. I wonder if you know a person like this. They're organized and they're focused. They're always on time for everything. This is the kind of person who probably wouldn't be intimidated by standing up to give a speech in front of a lot of people. And maybe this is the kind of person who knows their purpose in the world. I wonder if someone comes to mind for you, if you're thinking of someone specifically. Maybe you're thinking of yourself, in which case, congratulations. I am not really this type of person. For one thing, I'm almost never on time for anything. And I'm also definitely intimidated by standing up to give a speech in front of a lot of people. But most importantly, I was never really someone who knew what my purpose was in life. And you might not think those two things are connected, like being organized and focused and also knowing your purpose. But for me, it made me feel like I didn't really have my life together. And it bothered me on a deep level and on a day-to-day level because I felt like there was something I should be doing or putting my energy into, but I wasn't quite sure what it was or even how to find it. I wonder if you know this feeling in your own life of like you have all this energy and ambition, but you're not quite sure where to direct it, or that you're just on the surface of your own experience and you feel like there's something deeper, but you can't really get there. So this was how I felt for the early years of my 20s. And the thing is, I had a lot of the things that I'd been working towards. I had this incredible education here at this university, and I had the job in corporate law that I'd been trying really hard to get. And I had good health, and I was in my 20s, which are supposedly the years of freedom and joy. But I still felt this restlessness on a deeper level. And along with that restlessness, I also felt this sense of guilt because I didn't really grow up with a financial safety net. So I wondered whether I was even entitled to be asking these questions of myself, these questions about meaning and purpose. Like maybe I should just be grateful for the job that I had and settle down and get back to work, which maybe is the case. And I also felt this sense of almost being a little bit let down by life because our society at least tells you that if you have all of these markers of success, like if you have the job and the relationship and the house and the car and all of these things, then you will feel a sense of fulfillment. But even when I had those things, well, I didn't exactly have a car or a house, which maybe was the problem, but when I had some of those things, I still didn't feel this sense of deeper fulfillment. So all of this added up to feeling a little bit stuck and lost. In the field of existential therapy, there's a term for this feeling when someone is in this bit of empty space or doesn't have a core sense of meaning or purpose in their life. And the term is the existential vacuum, which sounds a little like a household cleaning appliance, but I promise it's much more deeper and much more interesting than that. The existential vacuum is this feeling of meaninglessness. It's empty space when you sort of get lost without a core sense of meaning or purpose in your life. And when you're in this place of the existential vacuum, you can feel totally lost or totally unmoored, totally alone. And it doesn't matter how much stuff you buy or how many things you put on your CV or how many followers you have on social media, you can still get stuck there. So back to my own journey and my own early 20s, my own existential crisis. After a little while of feeling stuck in that place, I decided to try and find myself an exit strategy. And the next 10 years were my search for meaning and purpose. Throughout the search, I looked for meaning and purpose in a lot of different places, through the therapeutic search for meaning and purpose, so existential therapy, through yoga and meditation and mindfulness, and for one particularly interesting year of life decisions, as a participant in a monastic training program. And along the way, I learned a lot about myself and about the power that I held to recreate and redesign my own life. And in the interest of you not all having to go through your own 10-year existential crisis, I'm going to tell you the 3 most important lessons that I've learned on the path so far. And where does the idea of restoration come into all of this? Well, what we're talking about when we talk about the search for meaning and purpose is almost like the restoration of the self. And the word restore comes from a Latin term meaning rebuild or renew. It's got the sense of both looking back towards the foundations of something and looking forwards to something that is not yet built. So it's similar when it comes to meaning and purpose. We look back at the structures of our lives, our biography, the things that we've done so far, and then we also look forwards to what is yet to come. So with all that in mind, here are the 3 main lessons that I've learned so far. The first lesson is this: you can equip yourself with the creative power to redesign your life. Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist and psychotherapist based in Vienna. He's also the author of the book Man's Search for Meaning, which you may have come across at some point. During the Holocaust, Viktor Frankl was subjected to some of the worst, most challenging conditions imaginable. He was detained in multiple concentration camps, losing his family and his life's work in the process. But having survived those experiences, Viktor Frankl came back to his previous work in psychotherapy and continued to develop this new field, which he called logotherapy, the word logos from the Greek word meaning meaning, or as Viktor Frankl uses the word, meaning spirit or ultimate sense of meaning and purpose. In the theological context, this word is sometimes translated as like word of God. It has a bit more of an ultimate meaning sort of implication. Logotherapy is the therapeutic practice of helping clients find a sense of meaning and purpose. At the core of Viktor Frankl's belief is this: you can design your responses to the things that come your way in life. Even if you can't control your external circumstances, you can control your responses and reactions to the things that happen to you. Take Viktor Frankl's own life as an example. During the darkest external circumstances, Frankl continued to see himself as having the power to determine a sense of meaning in those situations. This is a mindset shift, but it's an important one. This way of seeing the world doesn't see us as passive observers, but as creators, as designers and artists and authors of our own existence. It puts us into dialogue with ourselves and with our lives. There's a quote in this field of existential therapy which sort of sums up this general idea, and that is this: between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space, there is the power for us to determine our reactions. So that is the first lesson, that we are meaning-seeking, creative beings, and the question we can ask ourselves is this: how will we choose to respond to the things that happen to us in our lives? The second lesson is this: purpose finding is a practice. When I first started my monastic training program, the practice was the very first thing that I noticed, because monastic life is all about practice. Days tend to follow a set rhythm and routine. When we were on retreat, it would look something like this: morning prayer, study, teaching, community work, community meals, evening prayer, and then just repeat that for a few weeks every single day. When your life becomes about practice, you gain a certain level of clarity and focus. With the monastic example, the life of a monk is perfectly calibrated so that every action, every moment, every bit of energy is directed towards a connection, a greater connection with God. When your life is set up in this way, you don't have to worry too much about the details or about falling off track, because you set up your practice ahead of time and then you pour all of your energy into carrying it out. So when it comes to the purpose-finding path, we can take a similar kind of approach. If you want to find your purpose, set up your life in such a way that facilitates that as a practice. Stay close to yourself. Establish regular habits and routines and check-ins that enable you to keep coming back to yourself again and again. This could be as simple as sitting down every week with a journal or a notebook, or even a friend or a therapist, and talking about your goals and your ambitions and where you are on the purpose-finding path. The important thing is that it becomes a practice. In a world that encourages quick fixes and overnight transformations, this is a countercultural approach, but it's one that has immense power. So that is the second lesson, that purpose finding is a practice, a discipline to be developed over time. And the question we can ask ourselves is this: how will we shape and form our lives in such a way that it creates a purpose-led practice? The third lesson is this: purpose finding is an element of well-being. I've been around the well-being industry for quite a long time. I started practicing yoga almost a decade ago, and I trained to be a teacher a number of years after that. And the well-being industry is great in that it enables people to feel better, but it's also exactly that. It's an industry, and it encourages a focus on specific problems to be fixed with more products and sellable solutions. We don't really want this approach when it comes to the purpose-finding path. We don't need a particular product to fix us, or a particular book, or a particular teacher, even one with a TEDx talk on purpose. What we need is a more holistic, integrated approach that takes into account our mind, our body, and our spirit. This is one of the reasons that yoga as a discipline has always been so interesting to me, because yoga is a physical practice, of course, but it's also a deeply spiritual practice and one that rests on a shared set of values and principles. Yoga rests on this idea of integration. The word itself, yoga, comes from a Sanskrit root meaning union, as in like to join together, or yoke, joining or blending things together. I think this is one of the things that gets missed in our modern pursuit of wellness on a broader level, because when we pursue these specific ideas like meditation or productivity or eating well or getting fit or sleeping enough or even finding purpose, we sort of neglect this greater sense of integration that takes into account every aspect of ourselves on every single level, ourselves and also our relationship with others and our relationship with the world. So this idea of integration, we could call it maybe like existential wellness, which sounds a bit dramatic, but the idea is that we are complex, integrated human beings, and any attempt that we make to find full well-being or full aliveness needs to be multifaceted. So that is the third lesson, that well-being is integrated with purpose-finding on a deeper level, and the question we can ask ourselves is this: how we choose to take care of every single element of ourselves. I want to tell you about one more idea that is not really related to the three lessons, but is also sort of shows up in each of them. And it also shows up in a lot of different places like anthropology, architecture, spirituality, and philosophy. And that idea is called liminal space. The word liminal comes from the Latin word meaning a threshold. And the idea of this space is that it's threshold time and space. It's not quite in one thing and not quite in the other. It includes all of the times and moments when you're in between things, like you're in between the ending of something and the beginning of something else, or you're in between stages or seasons of your life. Liminal space is in transition, it's time in movement, and if this description sounds a little vague or uncertain, that is exactly what it is. Grief could be an example of liminal space on a personal or emotional level. When we go through a period of grief, we move from one stage of life to another, but we don't get there immediately. It's not like an overnight transformation. When we're moving through grief, it happens slowly and steadily. There's a long period of mourning and releasing the previous stage, and then of moving into a new stage of life. Coming of age rituals are another interesting example of liminal space. So normally we have these moments where we move from one stage of life to another, often with the help of community rituals. Take graduation, for example. It's a ceremonial moment where we move from one thing, which is student life, to another thing, which is full adulthood, or theoretically. The Great Resignation could also be an example of liminal space happening in a cultural setting. So with the Great Resignation, the US labour statistics showed that over 4.5 million people quit their jobs during this trend, which some people are now referring to as the Great Redesign or the Great Reshuffle. The clear indication here is that things are changing. We've left the old way things were, and we're moving to something new, but we're not quite there yet. The reason I mention liminal space here towards the end of this talk is because it gives us a helpful way to frame this present moment. Collectively, coming out of the experience of the past few years, we're in this period of liminal time and space. We're not quite in the old thing, but we're not quite in the new thing either. When it comes to the purpose-finding path then, we need this opportunity to kind of step outside of the everyday structures and routines and rituals of our lives. And so we can reevaluate and have almost like a blank canvas on which to think about what we're going to do next. We need to pause or slow down so we can recalibrate and rethink about how we want to redesign going forwards. So collectively, coming out of the experience of the past few years, we have this opportunity, this liminal space, to decide now what we want to do differently, how we want to reshape and reform and redesign. We can change up things, we can think about a new kind of future, and we can build on what's already happened. This period of liminal space, as much as it can be really uncomfortable and difficult and challenging, can also be the holding space in which we do this creative work. And the question we can ask ourselves is this: what will we do with this opportunity, with this liminal space? As I mentioned right at the beginning of this talk, I certainly wouldn't consider myself to be someone with all of the answers. And at some point along the way, I stopped looking for the answers altogether. And instead, I found the more interesting path in to be looking for the questions. And in standing here at Cambridge University, a place where I was so often reminded that I did not have all of the answers, or even most of the answers, it seems like a good time to remember. The excitement, the fulfillment, the fullness of life is in the questions, not in having a perfect response to those questions. This is where the depth of life is found, in the curiosity and aliveness that compels us to go further and deeper into our lives, the only lives we get, as far as we're aware. I want to leave you with a final quote from Rilke, the poet and novelist. "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers which cannot be given you, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then you will gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer." For those of you just starting out on the path towards purpose and meaning, I want to wish you the very best of luck wherever the questions take you. And for those of you who have been engaging with these questions of purpose and meaning for some time now, I want to wish you a restoration of energy, a restoration of excitement, and a restoration of aliveness and curiosity as you move onwards. Thank you.